Scheinkman, who is an LCSW and a faculty member at the Acumen Institute, where she has directed the Couples and Intimacies project for the past 14 years. So she is a beloved member of the Acumen Institute. Michele is a former director of the Couples Therapy Training Program at the Chicago Center for Family Health, lecturer at the University of Chicago School of Social Service and Administration, and a consultant at the multicultural Roberto Clemente Center in New York City. Michele has done workshops throughout the United States and globally, and in such places as Europe, Latin America, and Asia, and is very well known for her theoretical clarity and her ability to deal with complex issues related to couples such as infidelity, jealousy, intimacy, and sexuality. And always, Michele deals with these issues from a multicultural perspective. And last, but I'm sure not least, you'll have to Google for more, but Michele was the recipient of the 2018 American Family Therapy Academy Award for innovative contribution to couples therapy. And with that, I give you Michele. Thank you, Michele.
Thank you, Marlene. Thank you so much. You're very kind in your introduction. It's a big pleasure. I haven't been presenting for a while, with COVID and everything. So it's a big, thing to be here today and to be presenting at Acumen. It's always a fun thing. And the topic today is a topic that I've been interested for a very long time, which is couples impasses. And my main focus today will be the vulnerability cycle. That is a model and framework to understand and transform couples impasses. And I will be referring today also to the multi-level approach. That is a roadmap for people who are working with the vulnerability cycle. It's a roadmap for the therapist to go through the process of therapy in a step-by-step basis, taking into account different lenses to look at the impasse. Since, most couples come to therapy wanting some sense of improvement in their sense of intimacy. I will also be talking about intimacy a little bit, and the time is short, and I've written about these different topics. But I would like to say a few things about the vulnerability cycle and how it applies to promoting intimacy in couples relationship too. Let's see how I do this slide here. Okay. Well, my starting point. Okay, I started seeing couples in 1973, so it was a long time ago. But I wanted to tell you before I tell you about my professional trajectory, because I want to give you a sense of that. I want to just tell you that I'm originally from Brazil. I came here in the 1970s with my husband. Soon after we got married. Our idea was that we were going to study here, and then we were going to go back. And as you can see, we are both still here. We never did actually. But I can see, looking back, why this topic of couples and couples therapy became so important to me, and also couples impasses. I married very young. I came here, I was 20 years old, and truth be told, it wasn't an easy time to be an immigrant at age 20, recently married, in a very different reality. And also, I arrived here in the 1970s when everything seemed to be changing at the time, what it means to be a couple, what it means to be a woman. So I had a lot of things to process. And so when I started social work school, immediately I was interested in couples therapy. And the first, interesting enough, the first case I ever saw in my placement, my placement was a family agency in the south side of Chicago. And the first case I saw was a couple. And it was not just a couple. They were a couple in their mid-40s, I'm going to call them Mary and John, who had been married to each other twice, divorced from each other twice, and they were seeking therapy to see if they could get married again. You know, what did I know? You know, I was 23 years old or something. And, you know, I thought it was a pretty interesting kind of proposition, but I had no idea. I never saw any other couple like that ever since. So at the time, you know, I was very lucky because I was reading in a research class, Pragmatics of Human Communication by Paul Václavic, and also like someone gave me Jay Haley's book, Strategies of Psychotherapy. And I was really taken by their very different approach, you know, like, you know, all the most of what was still being taught in social work school was within a psychodynamic model where problems were looked very much in terms of like personal history, family history, etc. So to be kind of presented to such a different outlook was very exciting. So I felt like, okay, I'm going to try these ideas with this first couple that I was seeing. So that was my starting point. You know, I was very lucky because I was able to see Mary and John for many months, and I could observe then what Václavic was talking about, the way that couples' problems are embedded in interactions that promote, you know, disconnection and polarization. He may not use exactly that language, but you know, they showed that, and I'll be talking to you a little bit more about those ideas too. But what I really learned at that time, I think the main lesson that stays with me is that couples' problems are usually embedded in reciprocal interactions that need to be understood, unpacked, disentangled, and transformed. That I learned with Mary and John. So back to them, you know, as we were working, I learned how to track interactions, you know, and how, you know, I started like, you know, tell me about your problem, you know, so, and they tell me about their fights, and they say, how did it start? And what do you say? What does she say back? What do you say? What does he say? So right away, that was one of my first kind of, you know, learning experiences with the interactional model. So what I observed was that, you know, they were trapped in a pattern in which Mary's nagging prompted John to evade and withdraw, which in turn prompted Mary to lecture him and nag him even more. And the more she nagged him and more forceful she was, the more he withdrew. And they were trapped into this. And this dance that they had would escalate, and sometimes John would go, oftentimes he would go drinking with his buddies and disappear sometimes until late at night or overnight. And then, of course, when he came home, she was furious and explosive, and that would lead to a huge escalation. And they loved each other, so they would reconcile a lot of the time and make up, but you know, just a little bit later, that same pattern would repeat itself again and again and again, right? So at the time, I didn't have that language, but essentially they were trapped in a pursuer and distancer type of dynamics that was leading them, you know, to escalations and polarization. And at some point, when things got really unbearable, they would separate and get a divorce. Okay, so what was interesting for me is that, you know, let's see. So when I tracked these interactions and I demonstrated to them, they were very relieved to understand, and they could also identify what each one of them were doing. So that was the Jay Haley thing here. So I decided to give them a task in which I wanted Mary, rather when she got annoyed with him because they still were in that pattern, you know, that she lectured him, she would tell him what to do. She was pretty, you know, I wouldn't say controlling, but, you know, she was the boss there. But when she would do that, he would get very quiet, withdraw, etc. So I gave her a task. Then whenever she felt frustrated, I wanted her to write about her frustration in a little book, but not to share with him. That just give to me in the therapy. And then I said to him that you're saying you really want this relationship. So you have to make one decision about something you can do that will be a step in the right direction. So that's what I said to him. For her, there was that task. So interesting enough, she was able to do the task and had a huge book of criticisms and complaints and anxiety and all of that. And he immediately joined AA and secured himself a sponsor. So when he did that, the whole anxiety of the situation decreased, and they were able to kind of like begin seeing each other frequently. And she held back her you know, her nagging, her lecturing. Obviously, I pointed out to her too, you know, that was not working very well. And as the anxiety decreased, he moved back and he went back to the house where they used to live. So I thought the therapy had succeeded. I was very excited, and I began to talk to them about you know, a termination. And interesting enough, when I started talking about termination, they surprised me with a torrent of emotions that I had not expected. You know, they were doing well. And what happened, you know, it was, I think in the session when I mentioned that we were going to terminate, Mary began to talk about how she grew up in a family that both of her parents were alcoholics. And both of her parents were sometimes like out. And she was the one who had to take care of her younger siblings. So she had been a caretaker since she was about 9 years old. So that, you know, holding back that kind of impulse to take care of things, it was really hard for her. And John talked about the fact that he grew up feeling very lost and helpless because his mother died when he was about 11 years old. And he felt that there was nobody sort of like giving him any guidance. His dad was kind of somewhere else in his mind. And he felt that he loved Mary exactly because Mary was so sure of herself and she knew what she was doing. At the same time, he couldn't handle how tenacious she was. And so, you know, it was really interesting to me that, the interactional model doesn't address emotions, right? But so I wasn't expecting to deal with that since my model was an interactional model. But if I look now, I can see that what I learned from them at that early stage was that I needed to take into account that level of emotions and feelings behind the interactions that were problematic to them. So let's see. I would say that the combination of the interactional perspective with realizing how pressing the emotions are, for me, are the origins of the vulnerability cycle, which is the model that I'm talking about today. Okay, so, when couples come to therapy, they may describe a great variety of problems, from we're not having enough sex, we are fighting all the time, we're growing apart, Mark just had an affair that I found out, I'm devastated, I think I should be leaving. So people may describe very different kinds of problems. My starting point, of course, is to listen to each partner's view of the problem, try to understand since when they were having those problems. But then right away, I guess what I learned from Václavic, I in the very first session, I begin to track their interactions. so I can visualize their dance. While some couples, call trapped in conflictual kind of in a conflictual type of pattern, they fight a lot, they bicker a lot. Others may be quietly disengaging from each other and are just feeling that the silences are heavier and heavier and they are more and more disconnected. Still others, like Mary and John, are sometimes in an interaction where one partner wants to address the issues like Mary and the other is evading and they are trapped in this situation. Sometimes even the person who is evading doesn't even want to come to couples therapy, right? And sometimes there's situations of infidelity that complicates a lot these other dynamics. And I'll address that a little bit. What I've come to understand is that irrespective of the presenting problem and irrespective of the interactional pattern, when the partners find themselves stuck in the same old dance, it's a sign they are being compelled by a vulnerability cycle. And they don't understand that. So if you track their interactions and if you understand that they are repeating the same dance again and again, it means we need to understand, what is their vulnerability cycle. Okay. I'm going to start with the experience of the impasse, like since my interest is impasse. I differentiate impasse from a simple disagreement. A disagreement is like two people butt heads about something, but they find some way to resolve it. They either negotiate or they just tolerate each other, etc. An impasse is a different thing. An impasse, usually, it's a recurrent, what I call an impasse, right? It's a recurrent type of interaction that the two partners have no control. So it's very the experience itself is usually, I don't know, I imagine many of you who are here today have experienced that sense that you are with your partner in the same old dance, and there's somehow you can't make a dent to change it. We usually feel frustrated, demoralized. Oftentimes we feel misunderstood, mistreated, drained, and most of anything, I think we feel really alone when we are trapped in an impasse with our partners. And as the dance keeps repeating itself, we may end up feeling that the relationship is hopeless, like Mary and John. They got so much into the same thing that at some point they feel this is not working. One thing that is particularly frustrating is that, when we try to change the dynamics of the impasse from within, actually, sometimes it becomes worse because, our strategies obviously are not working in general. And, I'll talk more about that too. The other thing about couples impasses, the experience is that it's really scary to be sucked into a downward spiral that we have no control, that escalates and we are out of control. Peggy Papp used to say one of the things about partners when they are trapped in impasses is that they usually say that, they don't like who they become. And that's true. There's something very constricting about being in these power struggles with someone we love. We begin to be irritated, to be moody, and the impasse sometimes takes over, a lot of the relationship. One of my clients described an impasse as trying to walk on quicksand. The more he tried to step out of his fights with his wife, the more sucked in he became. And I think that's what's difficult about this. The good news is that through examination of these very difficult moments of impasse, the partners have the opportunity to look from outside have a different perspective as they begin to examine the impasse, to slow down the reactivity. They have the opportunity to reflect about their defensive strategies, their vulnerabilities, their yearnings. And through this process, couples usually find actually new ways of connecting and feeling intimate. I love the Leonard Cohen's song that there is a crack in everything, and this is how the light gets in. I think he understands. So the maps, in Steps to an Ecology of Mind, Bateson cautioned us that the map is not a territory. And I totally agree that our theories are just representations. They are not the reality out there. But he also says that it's important to have maps. And I agree with that. I felt all along, since that early days of being a couples therapist, that I needed maps, and I felt my trainees and my students needed maps so that they could try to understand the complexities of human problems, especially when we are trying to understand them within broad ecological and social contexts. So, when I started doing couples therapy was still like there was a guy, Manus, who wrote an article that he said it was a practice in search of a theory. I think it was still at that stage in the 1970s and early 80s, that couples therapy, was very much a sub kind of a topic in family therapy. Some therapists still used a psychodynamic model to try to understand it, but there wasn't really a coherent theory that helped kind of us really look at couples in itself. And family therapy did a lot of important contributions that that I integrated into my work, but still it took a long time for the field of couples therapy, for family therapy, to address issues that are pertinent just to couples. Until the 1990s, there was very little things written about infidelity, jealousy, power dynamics, what else? Sexuality. There was a total disintegration of sexuality in couples therapy because couples therapy was very much a sub kind of topic in family therapy. And family therapy looked a lot at triangles more than at the dyad, and so it took a long time for us to get there. So I felt really pressed when I began to teach in the 80s at the master's program, and then later at the Chicago Center for Family Health. I felt pressed to sort of create some maps to help students. And the first map is the one that I wrote with Mona Fishbane, The Vulnerability Cycle. Is an article that we wrote together in which we tried to describe the anatomy of couples impasses. And many of the things I'll be talking about comes from that time and my collaboration with Mona. I also, at the same time, was working on this other paper, the multi-level approach, that is a roadmap for doing couples therapy. Let's see. In the multi-level approach, I proposed a roadmap to how we can navigate the therapeutic process step by step from beginning to the end. So it's much more of a clinical kind of a article, the ideas. And then, as I was working with that, one of the other things that I felt a need to really explore was the idea of intimacy. Because coming from a different culture, I felt that the way that my supervisors and even colleagues thought about intimacy was somewhat different than in my background in Brazil. So I felt a real need to kind of explore this issue, and I came to the conclusion that there isn't intimacy. There's intimacies. You know, there are many different kinds of intimacies depending where you're coming from. So I'll talk to you a little bit about that too. And that's another map for me. Well, okay. Okay. So let me start. You know, I don't know. Some of you may know the vulnerability cycle. Some of you may not. So I will just briefly describe what the model is. The vulnerability cycle is a non-pathology resilience framework to help therapists and couples understand the anatomy of couples impasses and how to transform them, basically. I was trying very hard to summarize it here. It's also an integrative framework that brings together interactional, emotional, neurobiological, contextual, and multi-generational factors that may be maintaining the couples in impasses. I hope some of you were here when Mona Fishbane talked about the neurobiology of impasses, and you know, it really has been very interesting to me how Mona and I talked a lot about impasses before we had any knowledge about the neurobiology, you know, the neurobiology, and how it confirmed some of the clinical ideas that we both kind of had observed. And I found that really fascinating. So as I said, you know, like I already said, the vulnerability cycle is an understanding of the impasse itself in its many dimensions, and the multi-level approach is the roadmap, you know. The diagrams are very important for visualization, but also for gathering information. So I have a few diagrams that I use. This is the basic interactional diagram that, let's see. This one describes the interaction in the emotional process in terms of the yellow is the yellow is the vulnerability. And when vulnerabilities are triggered, like this is a case of Bob and Sandy. And when Bob's vulnerabilities were stimulated because she was traveling a lot, I'll tell you about the case later, but just to summarize, when Bob's vulnerabilities were stimulated, he would protect himself by detaching and distancing, which here's the arrow that goes to which would go to her vulnerability. She would feel abandoned and unsupported. And then her survival strategy was to become very self-sufficient. The more self-sufficient she became, the more, you know, he felt abandoned. The more abandoned he felt, the more he detached. So that's the basic interactional cycle. Okay, I always integrate the vulnerability cycle with the genogram. So actually, I have even a little form that I have those two things together. And not only the genogram, but I also, you know, I have a box in some of them here around the vulnerability cycle where I try to describe on the side here what is the context that is influencing them too. Because in Ron and Sandy's case, you know, it was only when she started traveling in graduate school that they began to have problems. So sometimes there's often a context to the activation of the cycle. You will see, you know, that I always want to understand, after I understand the cycle, I want to understand the vulnerabilities. And when I try to understand the vulnerabilities, I begin to ask questions. Well, have you ever felt this kind of feeling of being abandoned or rejected? And then she begins to see, well, you know, my father was someone who was really hot and cold, so I really needed to I learned to protect myself by not asking him too many questions, not depending on him. So you begin to explore the vulnerability in terms of the family of origin. So for me, that is crucial. So these things are, for me, always together. I start with the interactional, but at some point when I grasp the survival strategies, the vulnerabilities of each partner, then I immediately explore those in terms of the genogram, but also with questions about when did it start, what was going on there, or sometimes the context is more elusive, but comes through at some point in the therapy. I'll show you more of that, especially with power issues. This is how all my cases look like. This is just to show you how I really do it in all my cases. I usually have the couple here. The box is like, you can see the context. Then I put down here vulnerabilities, survival strategies. So this for me is my map for my cases, And in this case here, I don't even remember who this is I think it's someone I consulted a long time ago. But when I begin to get information about the intergenerational important things, I begin to see how these may inform the vulnerabilities that are being activated in the here and now. Okay, this is just to give you a sense of how they look like in my practice in general. Okay, so I want to talk about the processes involved in couples impasses. And I want to start with the interactional ones, the ones that after my initial work with the Václavic ideas, I continue to explore them. And there are a few fundamental systemic ideas that are critical for me for understanding couples impasses. One is the idea of circularity that I already have been mentioning. The other one is the fact that every human communication, there's a content level and a relational level. And the other one is escalations. Okay, so when couples come to the office, let's see here. Sorry, I want to see if I have something else to say about circularity. Okay, circularity. So when couples comes to the office, they are often engaged in a competitive dynamics in which they are usually fighting about who is right and who is wrong, or who is the perpetrator and who is the victim. Hoping for validation, they usually put us in a position of referee or judge who will determine their sentence. But that is not our job as therapists, of course, right? What they fail to understand, that we need to understand, is that the problem they are involved is actually being co-created by both of them. That there isn't, it's not a binary issue of he's right and she's wrong. And that is one of the things in training new therapists in couples is how, sometimes I work with psychoanalytic oriented therapists, and it's very easy for them to sort of like identify with one or the other. But if you understand the interactional perspective, in circularity, you begin to see that the problem is embedded in circular interactions that are reciprocal and co-created by both parties. And that helps a great deal, not only, I think, helps to understand the problem, but also helps us as a therapist to take a position of seeing both sides of the story and not taking sides. So this is like something, I have supervision groups, and this is always the first lesson, is like, how do you understand the problem embedded in circular interactions that are being co-created by the two parties? I think I said that before, that impasses are not just disagreements. They involve these circular interactions that are calibrated and that keep the partners triggering one another. Thus, they perpetuate the vulnerability cycle. So I hope that that's clear, that, a disagreement is something that happens and goes away in some way or another. An impasse is when, my survival strategies trigger the other person, and the other person then triggers me, and then I trigger them. And actually, what becomes the problem is what's being maintained by the interactions. It's not just that I'm vulnerable, I was vulnerable when we disagreed. It's really that we keep re-triggering one another. Okay, the other idea from the interactional perspective that I think is really very important is the idea of that, this is an idea today is part of our daily language, like double messages and all of that. But I think what the MRI group really understood is that communication involves these two levels. Sometimes, there's the content level in which we are trying to pass information about whatever, a movie, a friend, a story, and there is the relationship level in which we are communicating how the message is to be taken. And the subtext may be a critical comment, implicit comment. It could be, it's your job to clean the kitchen. It could be, a blame, you've done it again. I had an interesting interaction with a couple that I see that the husband very nicely was reading a psychology book and gave it to his wife. And he said, I really want you to read this. And she immediately got defensive because she thought, oh, here he comes. He found something in the book to criticize me. And she immediately began to get defensive. So he was, you could think he was just giving her a book to read, but actually there was an implicit message, a subtext that actually was something that triggered her. So the reason I think this is important is that the trigger of impasses are usually in the subtext. They are not really in the content message. Sometimes they may be, but for most of the time they are in the relationship level, where through a tone of voice, facial expression, an attitude that has to do with something else, we actually end up feeling criticized, disrespected, put down, etc. And since the triggers are usually in the subtext, in the undertones, metacommunication is very important and very critical. However, sometimes even when people try to metacommunicate, they actually get themselves into difficult situations because their attempts to metacommunicate become part of the cycle. So we'll get to that. Let's see. Oh, sorry. Okay. The third idea that I think also has to do, it comes from the interactional model, is the idea of escalation. Escalations, they don't talk about in terms of couples necessarily, but they identified how interactions escalate. And as we know, even in between two countries, between two people, between two groups, escalations are the most toxic aspect of relationships. They usually, in terms of couples, they take the couple in a downward spiral that becomes very difficult to control and to reverse. And when couples are trapped in a vortex, they feel more and more reactive, more and more irrational. They become unable to listen, to empathize, and definitely to connect. Some strategies in interactional strategies, especially damaging. For example, when the partners keep trying to even the score. Oh, you did that, but I did that. Blah, blah, blah. This kind of escalation can be really boring and painful. The other one that is really problematic is retaliations. Like I have a couple that I saw recently that, he had an affair many years ago, and then she started a new job, and the first opportunity she had an affair, and she said, he had one, why don't I have one? Those are very problematic kind of strategies. And of course, another one that is even more common is name calling. And name calling can be something like, you're a narcissist, or it can be something much worse, those escalations are very injurious, very hurtful, and they tend to lead the couple in a very bad direction. The end game of escalations can include, increasing tension between the couple, the partners, deeper emotional wounds. Sometimes people are so frustrated that they betray because they feel the relationship is too crazy. It could be violence, and like you saw with Mary and John, it may lead to the rupture of the bond. So learning how to interrupt escalations and create safety is really a major task of couples therapists. And I see in my supervision groups how difficult that is. And I find it myself too. You have to be firm to interrupt escalation. It's not something you can just interpret. You cannot just go back to family of origin and understand what's going on there. Those things may later help but when a couple is in escalation, that I think as a therapist, I feel I have to be very firm about the destructive power of their strategies. So sometimes one thing that is helpful is to have individual sessions in which we can actually empathize with what's behind, but also be very firm that they are going in a very bad direction. And I say sometimes to couples, if you continue going like that, I don't see how this relationship is going to survive. I may be very firm, but of course, I cushioned it before with like, of course you feel that way. Of course this has happened. Of course, and you have been hurt. And also teaching people how to apologize and repair, it's crucial. Okay, how are we doing? So this is the final kind of piece about the interactional ideas. Couples, I mentioned before, they may have very different choreographies. And some couples, they are, very quick to anger, and they, oh, you know what? There's a mistake here in this slide. This withdrawal here belongs to mutual withdrawal here. It went in the wrong place in the slide here. I'm not sure why. So this is a conflictual couple. This is a pursuer and a distancer, and this is the mutual distancer here. Okay. So conflictual couples, I think, are probably the most challenging for the therapist because they're insistent, they're quick, the quickness to blame, the quickness to project on the other what's wrong, sometimes throw us really completely off center. So when we are working with conflictual couples, I think it's important for the therapy to express equal empathy for both, but as I said, block the partner's toxic behaviors, such as blaming, demonizations, and criticism, etc. One of my clients felt very victimized by her husband because she felt that he was cold. She would talk about him all the time. He's bizarre. He's crazy. He's power hungry. But she didn't see any of how she was perpetuating the conflict by actually demonizing him in those ways. Because sometimes if he said to her something like, "Come down with the children," like just like that, "Come down," she would think he's bizarre, he's crazy. She would go off on a tangent of aggressions that obviously would make him feel even more kind of a distance from her. So I think it's really, really important to call the partners on their toxic behaviors. Okay. The pursuer and distancer dynamics is also, I think, very challenging because we often have to help the pursuer to contain, like Mary, to contain her pursuits, and zip her mouth, not come on all the time, and we have to encourage the distancer to stay present and to move forward, and that can be a challenge. But somehow with Mary and John, I don't use as many tests as I used there, but as I was preparing for this, I was thinking, well, I really need to go back to using some tests, because that test was very helpful for her not to say anything, help her, stay with herself rather than automatically try to control him. And for him, when there was space for him, he actually was able to come forward. Mutual distancing couples, for me, are the easiest one, because usually those are couples that are very, very careful with one another, very cautious, and oftentimes the therapist has a very privileged place in which we are bringing both back to the scene, So I think that at least I like that position, of that I'm the bridge to their isolation from each other. And sometimes individual sessions also help to actually try to see what's behind the distance, what the person would like to see happening, and then help that person bring that to the couple session. The other thing that I will just mention here is infidelity. Of course, when infidelities happen, first of all, when partners are involved in one of these patterns for a long time, they become, of course, more vulnerable to infidelities. It's common for a person who feels for a long time, criticized, chastised, unloved, etc., to go elsewhere to look for gratification. So I think that oftentimes infidelity can be a result of a vulnerability cycle that has been going on for a while. However, when affairs are revealed, they usually create a whole new vulnerability cycle that has to do with the reactivity around the affair. So usually, the reactivity, when there's an infidelity, there's a whole new vulnerability cycle in which there is suspiciousness, jealousy. The other person feels like, I can't stand this anymore. He can't let go of that. I stopped already with the case, and trust. There's a whole vulnerability cycle that we need to address. And usually, when that comes down, then we can actually see what was happening before the infidelity. When it's related to, not all infidelities are related to a vulnerability cycle. Sometimes some people just feel entitled to it, and there may be other reasons. But oftentimes there is another vulnerability cycle lurking behind the dynamics around the infidelity. Okay, before I go to the emotional dimensions of the vulnerability cycle, I would like to know if anyone has comments or questions about the interactional part.
There is one question, and this one asks whether or not you have done any studies or do you have any commentary on the use of meta-communication in a multicultural context. For example, the use of signifying in certain African-American Black populations or couples.
Signifying? I didn't understand the word. I'm sorry. What is the word? Signifying?
Signifying. Stephanie, who did this, do you want to explain signifying? Can you type it in the chat?
So the question has to do with if there's a problem with the meta communication. Is that it, Marlene?
Yeah, it asks, if you have any commentary on the use of meta communication in a multicultural context.
I have a case that I will talk about a multicultural couple that look, meta communication sometimes is helpful, and especially with the help of a therapist. sometimes it becomes part of the problem because it's very difficult to talk about talking. You know, it's different to talk about the dynamics when you are in the dynamics. So multicultural or not, you know, I think that meta communication is important, but I usually think that I often tell clients who are very activated to actually, let's talk about the impasses, your impasses here in the therapy, because then I can actually help to keep the meta communication outside of the cycle of the couple. So I don't know if that helps, but I will go back to a multicultural case that was an issue. Their difficulty in meta communication has to do with the difficulty in communicating to start with it, but I'll go there.
Stephanie later explained that it's a linguistic practice involving the indirect expression of ideas, especially through playful language. So it's not meant to be pathologized, you know, it's like this back and forth.
Right. No, I get
yeah.
it. You know, I also come from a culture that there's a lot of teasing. People are very playful, but in that teasing, there can be sometimes hurt, you know, and depending who you're talking to, you know, teasing it can be very hurtful. And for some people, it's part of how they interact and how they let steam off, you know. And so I do understand what you're saying, that I think we need to understand, you know, who are the players, you know, who are the people playing the game, you know, if, you know, teasing, Brazilians tease a lot. There's a lot of playfulness. People are always, humor is a very important part of the culture. So I think that in that, and you don't try to meta communicate about that, you just throw back a ball, you know, like, you know, if someone teases you, you tease them back, and that's probably how it goes. But when it becomes offensive and hurtful, then I think meta communicate, especially in the therapy room, is very helpful. And of course, some people are good to do it on their own too.
Okay.
Any other questions?
We don't have any in the chat,
Okay.
so we can move on.
Okay, yeah, because I have a lot to go on here. So what I want to talk about now, let's see, is the more emotional dimensions of the vulnerability cycle. You know, so there is these interactions, right? But in addition, you know, behind the interactions, there are usually vulnerabilities that are igniting the person that is in the cycle, the two people in the cycle. Impasses usually arise actually when vulnerabilities get triggered, and we put on a protective shield, you know, to a defensive or protective shield, and thereafter we begin to relate from one another defensively. So that's really, you know, how. So I will talk about these different elements of more emotional elements, I would say, each one of them. So I've asked myself, you know, since I work with the vulnerability cycle, what do I really mean by vulnerabilities? Now, vulnerability is a very broad kind of a notion. So I went to the dictionary, and the dictionary, Oxford Dictionary, says being vulnerable is, let's see, I have my definition here. Is an emotional state. Did it grow? I think my slide became is it too big now in the screen?
We can see it okay. I think you're okay.
Okay. So the Oxford Dictionary defines vulnerability as an emotional state in which we feel exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, physically or emotionally. In terms of our intimate relationships, we tend to feel vulnerable when we take a risk that the person is not going to receive what we are saying well, or we'll feel humiliated or feel rejected.
Michele, we can't see the entire slide. What's down the bottom?
Yeah,
So
okay.
you need to.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
thank you.
Oh, I wish I could shrink it back, but
Oh, we can see all of it now. You moved it up some, so we're good.
I think, no, I can't do it. Not sure why. Okay, so vulnerabilities tend to become calcified when we go through painful events, and this experience become registered in our bodies and minds and memories, right? So I guess because being vulnerable is not a pathological thing, and it's obviously part of our human condition. All of us are vulnerable one way or another, and most of us are existentially vulnerable to being attacked, to being betrayed, to being humiliated. So, you know, I assume all of us are vulnerable, but vulnerabilities become more like emotional wounds when they are reinforced by difficult events in our lives. And we carry those imprints, those I call them maybe calcified vulnerabilities throughout our lives. You know, like I think very much like files in the computer, they may stay dormant, you know, and not really do much, or they become activated, especially in the context of our intimate relationships. Okay. I just wanted to say that as therapists working with the vulnerability cycle, it's important to help the partners name their unique vulnerabilities. And we do so through a process called mentalizing that was developed by Peter Fonagy, a British psychoanalyst. And the process of mentalizing has to do with when we try to help someone else to name a mental state that may have to do with a feeling, a belief, a desire, or intention. You know, is the back and forth that you go with that person to help them define that feeling. And sometimes, because it's one of the difficult things about being a therapist, especially in the psychedelic tradition, is you interpret and you think that's what it is. So I think that when you mentalize, we're helping the person name their vulnerabilities. It's very important to say, oh, so when Sandy left for her trips, you felt ignored, you felt rejected, and you know, Ron, what is his name? Bob said, I felt all these things, but the real feeling was abandonment. I said, okay, so that's, and that naming of the vulnerability in collaboration with the person, I think is very important, because it helps, you know, not to impose my ideas on them, but at the same time, help them sort of like articulate something that is going to be important for our understanding. You know, vulnerabilities can become calcified due to many different life experiences. For example, we may feel vulnerable due to extra vulnerable. I mean, not just the existential vulnerability, but extra when we grew up in a family that there were some difficult patterns. We may become vulnerable because we have gone through some traumatic events in our lives. We can become vulnerable, extra vulnerable, I mean, because we had some emotional injuries in our prior relationships, you know, a divorce, violence, aggression. We become vulnerable in the history of our relationships with our partners. You know, they disappointed us, they had an affair, they had, you know, they were not there when I needed them to be. Also, we are vulnerable for more from institutionalized kinds of prejudices, you know, like, you know, stigma, racism, coercion that we experience, poverty, all those social contexts can actually be the source of our vulnerabilities. And the reason I want to say this is that I think therapists sometimes go really too fast to family of origin. And of course, I think family of origin is an important source of vulnerability. But there are so many other contexts that can make us feel vulnerable that I really think it's important for the therapist not to assume everything comes from personal history and family of origin. There's a lot more. We can be vulnerable because we feel, because of an illness that we have had, because we have a disability, or because we have a neurobiological propensity like ADHD, or we are, or to be bipolar, or some, etc. So there could be some neurobiological issues that make us feel particularly vulnerable. And the one I want to focus on is inequities between partners. Because again, if you go immediately to the family of origin, you may not be looking at how inequities within the relationship can make the partners feel extremely vulnerable. One word about before the inequity issue. I want to say that, of course, traumas are also a major source of vulnerability. But again, nowadays it seems everything is a trauma. So I think that I think of trauma of something very, I think there's a lot of things that are hurtful, but a trauma usually are big things like rape, an accident, or sometimes when infidelity can be a trauma, there a death, a loss. And I want to highlight that when we are working with the vulnerability cycle and the issue that is triggering one of the partners is a traumatic situation in the past, sometimes that traumatic situation may, the painful part may be dissociated. So in these situations, the person may be acting and reacting the survival strategies may be going on, and the couple is, like, for example, a client that I had, and she had this thing with the husband that she was very rejecting of sexuality. She felt invaded by a caress. There was a lot of reactivity, and she had no awareness that it wasn't in her conscious awareness, the fact that she was raped as a young child, 9 years old. It took her about 3 years in individual therapy and leaving her marriage, sleeping with another man for the whole memory to come up. So I just want to say that sometimes we have a sense there is a trauma, and there's nothing you can do about it. And you have to just say, well, something may have happened for you to be that sensitive, and that was the case with her. And it was a really learning experience for me. So one book that is really very good about trauma is the Judy Herman book. I love that book, Trauma and Recovery, because I think she addresses a lot of the survival strategies also that come up from trauma. But let's talk about inequities and power balance. I think this is a very important issue. Is much more, it happens much more than I think we give credit. That people feel vulnerable because of some sense of unequal power in the relationship. Inequities, in my view, are an important source of vulnerability, since they promote the most volatile impasses in couples' relationships. And so what I want to say about that is that in every marriage, there is a quid pro quo in which the partners, this is the PowerPoint here. Let me see if I can, trying to push. I lost it. We lost a little bit of the PowerPoint, huh? Are you? Okay,
yeah.
I got it. I got it.
Yes.
Okay. So in every marriage, there's a quid pro quo in which the partners expect their exchanges to be fair. Whenever the partner perceives that the respective roles are unequal, or there is some kind of unfairness in the ratio of sacrifices, I'll talk about that, there is usually an eruption of resentments that can really destroy the couple's bond. And I want to talk about this sacrifice, this idea of sacrifice. I heard a TED talk by this, she is a divorce mediation and professor of law at Harvard Law School. And she says that sacrifices in marriages need to be thought as fair exchanges, that the sacrifice I do has to be equivalent to the sacrifice you do. And oftentimes, people get very angry when they feel that they are sacrificing much more than the other. One example is a couple that I saw a while back that, the woman moved from another country to be with her husband in New York because of a job in the financial industry that he really wanted. And she left behind a teaching job that she liked, many friends, and also proximity to her family. The bargain was that she would be able to be a stay-home mom because they were getting pregnant and having children, and that he would be the provider. Well, at the time, it seemed like an okay arrangement, but a few years later, with two children in hand, two children that she was taking care of, she began to feel extremely resentful. She began to think that, she didn't like how the decision had been made, and she was very angry about the fact that, yes, he brought in the money, but, she was living in a place she didn't like. She hated, not being in her country, and she felt she was stagnating, not having her job anymore, and she was very, very angry. So that's what I mean about, he felt he was sacrificing in the sense that he was holding the financial responsibility, and he was, but she didn't think that was a fair exchange, And I think we really need to look at that in relationships. I'm sure all of you who work with couples, you have cases like that one person is really angry that they're doing more, and sometimes it's around small things. I'm doing all the housework, or I'm doing all the money management. I'm the one, and it's very hard also to evaluate what is a fair bargain. So oftentimes in therapy, in order to deal with those inequities in the marriage, it's very important to really talk to the couple and have them put out what it is that they are willing to do and what's too much, and help them negotiate that again. So this couple that she moved here, one of the things that this woman said is that she would be happy if they moved from the suburbs and came to live in the city. At least would be similar to the life she had before. She's used to being in the city. She couldn't stand being in the suburb. That was a huge sacrifice. So they began to negotiate so that there were some of her needs that were going to be addressed too. Sometimes it's hard because sometimes, even in her case, I think there was a lot of gender bias here. Like, of course, the woman follows the man to another place. Of course, the woman takes care of the children. There was a lot of assumptions like that had to be also reviewed in the process of therapy. Okay. I just want to say that vulnerabilities generate anxiety, and anxiety fuels the dance. So what I mean by that is that sometimes, there's an episode that triggers the vulnerability cycle because the person feels triggered and something was said, something happened. The person, came home late and that was a trigger. It's an event. But sometimes there's a chronic sense of anxiety that actually can also be triggering the vulnerability cycle. The person feels anxious. Actually, Murray Bowen talks a lot about that. Like, sometimes when people are anxious, they actually tend to pursue the other, and trying to find the solution on the other. And that pressure makes the other person feel there's a kind of a invasion on the boundaries. And then that person begins to protect themselves. And when they protect themselves, they actually sometimes participate on creating the vulnerability cycle. So the basic idea here is that the origins of anxiety sometimes are not very clear, and it takes some exploration. And just for us to think about what are some of the sources of anxiety that can ignite the cycle. One is the dance itself. The couple gets in a dance, with each other. He pursues, she distances, he pursues. The dance itself begins to generate anxiety too. So it's a kind of a cycle. The cycle may generate a dance, but the dance also can generate a cycle. The other thing that also promotes anxiety is, as I've been saying, when the couple's arrangement doesn't fit the needs of one or both partners. When the partners arrange their relationship in asymmetrical ways, like she's going to be the mom and I'm going to be the, sometimes that arrangement, it seems it's going to work, but actually over time, it doesn't fit the needs of one of the partners. I worked for many years in Chicago at the Student Mental Health Clinic at the University of Chicago. And I saw many couples there that organized their relationships. Like one person was, let's imagine, the medical student, and the partner was having kind of a menial, not a menial job, but a job that was not interesting to support them as a couple. And they organized the relationship in kind of a very dissimilar way. He was, investing in medical school. She was kind of trying to make money and take care of the child if they had a small child. And those arrangements used to be what traditional marriages were, but nowadays they tend to be very unstable. So I think it's important to look at asymmetrical arrangements, relationships where the arrangement is more symmetrical, both work, both take care of the kids, have other issues, but I don't think they are unstable in the same way, because the other one is more this issue of sacrifice that gets involved. There also, our vulnerabilities can also come from social cultural conditions or injunctions related to gender, race, class, culture. If we live in a world that in a small world where there is a lot of gender bias, I may feel anxious being in that world a lot of the time. Of course, if you live in a world that is racist and you are experiencing that on a daily basis, there may be oversensitivity to anything that's going on because, you are living in a world that is racist, There is also class issues that can be very important sources of vulnerability. So I'll tell you about a case where that is the case. Let's see. Of course, anxiety can come from family of origin, like Murray Bowen says, anxiety is contagious. It's true. If there's something going on with our parents or siblings and they call us, we get anxious, and our anxiety could actually be contagious into our marriage as well. Before I tell you about this, issues related to class, race, and gender expectations, I just want to say that, of course, that many times, oftentimes, our anxiety may come from fears, catastrophic fears, that have something to do with our past due to traumatic events, family patterns, etc. That is the most common thing that we all work with in couples therapy and family therapy. But I want to tell you about this couple that I think they illustrate very well resentments that grow in the relationship related to discrepancies around issues of class and race, especially in education in this case. I saw this couple many, many years ago, I'm calling them, Pam was a 43 years old, white middle class, educated North American woman who grew up in Tennessee and worked in the high fashion business, industry, I'm sorry. Raul, her partner, was 44 years old, class Brazilian man who moved to New York to be with her. They had met 5 years earlier when Pam was vacationing in Brazil and happened to see him teaching capoeira to some young kids in the beach. And she felt that he was so lovely with the children, and she was at an age that she really wanted to have a child. She said, this is the kind of man I want to be the father of my child. He was a good-looking man, dark skin, a jack of all trades, who in addition to teaching capoeira, he taught dance in the evenings, and he also ran a very little shop for tourists in the beach. But he spoke no English, and she spoke no Portuguese. But they had a hot sexual connection, and they decided to marry. They got married, and she brought him to the United States. He only had elementary school education, as I said, spoke no English. And 4 years later in my office, they are totally overwhelmed, having very confusing fights, which they barely spoke the language of the other. They still didn't really speak. She didn't speak Portuguese, and he spoke a very broken. I was both a therapist and a translator at the same time. So what I understood was that Raul was struggling with being an immigrant who did not speak the language, who did not understand the culture, who had a very small group of friends. He was a very social guy in Brazil. And the only jobs he could find was sometimes as a construction worker or selling some crafts in the streets. Pam, on the other hand, was a buyer for one of the top luxury brands, and she traveled 3 times a year, 4 times a year to Asia and to Europe. And they had a 3 years old daughter that Raul was the main caretaker. He was the more present partner. Their discrepancies about race, class, education, and culture was incomprehensible to both of them. They did not understand why things were going so bad. Luckily I could speak Portuguese, and I could understand that he felt very much like a fish out of water, very vulnerable, diminished and humiliated for being financially dependent, for being in a place he didn't understand, and living in a country that was racist. And not that Brazil is not racist, but is racist in a different way. He had a place there that he had a place that he was very admired. He was he danced very well. He he did capoeira, many things. He had a lot of things that gave him a sense of self and self-esteem, that when he got here, he was kind of trapped into this very difficult situation. And what happened with them that brought them to therapy was that he did not understand Pam's need to travel so frequently. And he thought she was kind of, when they got angry, he would call her, she's a whore, she was a bad mother. How could she leave her child all the time? Things escalated very badly between them. So I think the discrepancy between them and the fact that they didn't acknowledge that and understood how different they were. And it was a very difficult thing. And actually, he was almost psychotically jealous. He would, like if she would pick up the phone, he would be like who you're talking to. And this was a woman who, she really loved this guy, and she really wanted things to work. And through the session, she would cry and cry because she couldn't get through to him that she was faithful, and that was part of her job. There was a huge gap between these two people. The only solution for them actually, and that's how they solved the problem, was for them to move back to Brazil, to where he was from, so that he could, recapture his sense of self and self-esteem. I don't know how they did it for her. I don't know how it was for her being there, but that was how they negotiated things at the therapy. I think they also illustrate a very important aspect of abusive relationships when partners become violent due to a one-down position. Oftentimes violence and abuse are very crazy attempts to regain power and control in situations where the person feels diminished, devalued, and disempowered. What I think, the reason I think it's important to talk about that here is that power differentials are very difficult to articulate, and I think a lot of therapists don't address that as a source of vulnerability. And I think it's very important to be able to talk to people about their feelings about the quid pro quo and inequities in the relationship. Okay, so let's see, because any questions? Why don't we try to get some questions here?
Okay, we had one who wanted to understand if the vulnerability cycle compared to the infinity cycle of EFT, where secondary emotions are triggered, but underlying these are primary emotions, which are often hidden.
Yeah, I guess is a different language to speak about similar ideas. I like survival strategies, which I'll talk in a minute now, and vulnerabilities, because I think survival strategies immediately make us as therapists connect. It's a survival strategy. It's a way of being in the world. It's the best way I found to be in the world. So I like the language of survival strategies. And I like vulnerabilities because also it's not just the emotion, it's not primary emotions are emotions. I think that vulnerabilities, as I'm trying to make clear, are always contextual, and you immediately have to understand the context of the vulnerability. So I think it's because I think the EFT is not systemic like I think of systemic, the long 40, 50 years of systemic ideas. I think it looks at the emotional system, but in maybe at a little bit to family of origin, but it doesn't look necessarily at other aspects, systemic aspects. So the model's a little bit different, but they may overlap. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's talk about survival strategies, because survival strategies are the positions and strategies that we adopt in the course of our lives to manage our vulnerabilities and protect the self. So, I wouldn't call them secondary emotions. I would think, I guess neurobiologically speaking, they are very similar to the fight-flight responses. When we feel vulnerable, we want to protect ourselves. When we get threatened, we fight, flight, or freeze, right? So I think that it has a dynamic to the notion, And survival strategies manifest themselves in different ways. Some people, when they feel vulnerable, they attack, they blame, they criticize, they demand. Other people do something very different. They may be quiet and distant. Still, other people become numb and kind of out of touch with what the vulnerability is. Okay, this is the Mona, if you are interested in the neurobiological process, I highly recommend Mona's book. I just blocked it. The neurobiology. I'm looking at the book here to say the correct name of the book, but let's see. Mona, please write down the name of the book for me. It just escaped my mind for a minute. But I highly recommend, because it's I think a lot of the things that we are talking about, there's a neurobiological foundation that help us kind of actually feel that we are on the right track. So the survival strategies are similar to neurobiological fight, flight, freeze reactions because they are automatic responses when we feel vulnerable, threatened, or attacked. They promote the boomerang effect that Mona calls the dance of the amygdalas. You know, I'm upset, so I get reactive. I upset the other person. The person gets really reactive, and they get reactive. I get reactive, and you know. So I think that I love this dance of the amygdalas. Okay. Our survival strategies are very important elements of escalations. That's why I don't know whether the secondary emotions have that same characteristic. But the survival strategies are the best way we found in our lives to protect ourselves and regain sense of dignity and control in situations when we felt threatened. So when they are unexamined or they are frozen in the past, they become serious impediments to connection. And what we mean about that is that we may have developed over the course of our lives some ways of protecting ourselves that become very automatic, but sometimes, you know, we grow up and they don't work anymore. It could be that, you know, I used to fight with my brother and we'd punch each other, but if I do that when I am a 25, 30-year-old person, that's a bad thing, right? So our survival strategies have to be kind of evolve, and oftentimes they are frozen in the past, and they not really, we haven't really reflected about them very much. You know, I think Gottman talks about, you know, survival strategies when he talks about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, stonewalling. I think those are, I guess in my view, survival strategies that we use to protect the self in some way, but they totally backfire. And they are important kind of strategies that we need to confront and transform. Actually, any hostile strategy needs to be contained and counterbalanced with positive interaction. No, it needs to be contained and also counterbalanced with positive interactions and repair. So if we happen to say something very nasty and aggressive to someone, I mean, if we can demonstrate we are sorry, show repair, demonstrate that, you know, that we care for that person, and we do that very well, sometimes that can help dilute the effect of this heavy-duty strategies. Okay. So this is the final element of the vulnerability cycle that I think also is very important from the emotional perspective. You know, so we are neurologically wired to carry our vulnerabilities and survival strategies with us throughout our lives, right? You know, if I get hurt as a child, somehow I carry that memory with me. Or the memory of the event, sometimes fragments of the event, right? Our vulnerabilities, they can, as I said, they can stay dormant, or they may be activated. When they are activated in an interaction with our partner or in some situation, feelings, meanings, and beliefs that have been stored in our bodies and minds are imported into the present situation, and they overload the system, generating a lot of confusion and intensity in our reactions. So let me say that in a different way. So we carry our vulnerabilities with us throughout our lives. So if I had a boyfriend that hurt me when I was 16 years old, and my partner now does something rejecting, it may be that the anger that I feel with in the moment may have something to do with the present, but also it may have to do with the feelings that I've carried before about being rejected. And when there is this kind of a activation of resonances from the past, there is usually a confusion between present and past. So in moments of impasse, often there is a collapse of meanings between what's going on in the here and now and what is something that I experience then, right? And that is a very important part, because part of therapy is to help the partner separate the present from the past. How are we doing with time?
It's 7:34, and
Okay.
we end at 8.
Okay, so I have so much more there. Let me see. I have a case that illustrates this very well, but I think I want to talk just a little bit about intimacy too, because you know, if you're interested in understanding more how that works, you know, there are a lot of case examples in both the multi-level approach paper as well as in the vulnerability cycle that I worked with Mona. Okay, intimacy. You know, as I said, couples, when couples are able to contain their escalations enough, you know, this is my perception of how, at least the therapy with me, that's how it works. I work a lot on the process of escalation and transforming the strategies that are involved in there. When couples then begin to talk from a position of vulnerability to each other, rather than defensive positions, they begin to feel more connected and safer. And this is usually the time when wishes about certain aspect of their intimacy becomes the focus. So the couple may be fighting a lot. They may say to me that they have problems with sexuality, but they are fighting so much that it's very hard to talk about sex. But now when things come down, then we finally can actually begin to address issues that have to do with the quality of the intimacy of the couple. So in the second stage of the therapy, we are invited to help the couple make adjustments towards a better intimate fit between them. It may have to do with like, we need to communicate with more tenderness. It could be, you know, we have some issues in our partnership. We need to develop a better quid pro quo in terms of housework. It may have to do like, we are not having enough sex. So one aspect of the intimate relationship becomes the topic. Our job is to help them. One is to, and I'll say, to negotiate intimacy. I think intimacy is negotiated. And also to build a resilient enough foundation so that they can withstand the fluctuations of the relationship and know how to repair in moments of rupture. Okay. Okay. A big issue about intimacy has to do with expectations. I think nowadays, you know, people expect a lot. You know, I think Esther Perel talks about like how, you know, how we expect so much today that, you know, sometimes it's kind of I think I like this quote here actually that, you know, this Robert Ardrey is a playwright who says, we pursue the unattainable and we make impossible the realizable. I like that because I do think that when we expect so much from relationships, there's a lot of room for disappointment. And a lot of people come to therapy very disappointed that, oh yes, we have a great friendship. We were good parents together. We like to take vacations. But our sexual relationship, I've had it better. I think it's a problem. There's not enough passion, you know. And sometimes people want everything to be perfect. And that's not how life is. But I think that it's important to as therapists, you know, I think as therapists, sometimes I think we also have a responsibility not to generate more and more expectations about how the relationship should be. I think oftentimes, there's a lot of gurus out there offering, fantastic connection, fantastic sexual connection, etc. So I think that it's important to help people work on the areas that are not working well in their intimacy, and to negotiate and to talk about their wishes and desires, which is really part of the vulnerability cycle too, that when the couple puts down their vulnerability, their survival strategies, and talk more from vulnerability to vulnerability, they oftentimes can talk about, I would like our sexual relationship to be more like that. I feel that I feel that we don't do enough things together, or I feel that you don't listen very well. So we can work on those issues in themselves, no longer in the cycle. Okay. In working with intimacy, I think the one issue for me is, as I said before, since I come from a different culture, my sense of intimacy was very different than many people, many friends and colleagues that I encountered here. And that made me kind of wonder, what is it? And I began to think that intimacy is a very individual. Our preferences in intimacy tend to be very individual. And also, there are many cultural differences about what intimacy means. Well, for example, North America, there are values like transparency, telling the truth, talking about feelings. Other cultures prioritize touching, tolerance, sexuality, sharing experiences. So I think, the person who asked me about the issue about meta communication, I think that it's the same question here. It's different cultures. If a Brazilian couple comes to see me and they see they don't feel intimate, I don't think they are talking about. I know they are talking about. How can I say? Sexuality, sensuality, dancing together. Those things are indicators that they are, in an intimate connection. So I think it's all of this I'm saying all of this to say that it's very important to try to get from each partner what is their priorities in intimacy. Maybe we all want all the sensory kinds of things they have to do with intimacy. We want the talking, we want the sharing, we may want all of it. So it's very important in working with intimacy to try to understand what are the priorities of each individual, and then help them negotiate a good enough fit. So if one partner loves the outdoors, and that's so important to him, this other partner may have to develop some interest in that a little bit, or so that she can connect to him, and vice versa. So intimacy for me is a way of developing connections. So if sex is very important for one partner and the other partner is not interested, I have many couples like that, one partner is very interested in sex and the other person is not interested in sex. And I often say, of course, it's very hard to have sex if you don't want it, but is there a way to develop some interest? Is that important to your partner? And it signifies being loved, being wanted, being touched. All those things are important to him. And if that partner feels that conversation is very important, that partner who is a little bit of a silent person needs to learn a little bit more how to talk about what's going on in his mind, so that he can connect to that partner's needs. So for me, intimacy is not something that I therapists know and bring to the sessions. I feel that, of course, I know some things because I see so many couples, but I feel that I really want to get from them what it is that feels intimate and that they would like to see more in their relationship. So, okay. Oh, so this is just like to show the diversity of intimacies. These people are intimately talking to each other. These people are sensually connecting. These people are just kissing. These two guys are intimate because they share a child together. So do these women. So there are many different experiences that can be perceived as intimacy. Oh, there's another one. Sorry, now that is my, sorry, I'm having a harder, how do I get it out this? Okay. I can't move. I'm having a hard time moving my.
Sierra, any ideas?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, okay, yeah, some
Okay.
crazy things. I just wanted to show you that, in the intimacy scenes here, if I can go back, some people are intimate because they share religious beliefs together. Some people because they share a family. So there are many ways of being intimate. And for me, intimacy is not either just sex or conversations, sharing everything. I like that comment this comment about playfulness, for example. Playfulness is very important in certain cultures. In other cultures, people are much more serious. When I spent some time in Japan, and I was really struck when I asked them what there was a group of therapists, what was the main idea about intimacy there. And they said, here in Japan, partners never think about sharing all their thoughts and feelings with the partner. Actually, they do that with people of the same gender usually. What they think is intimacy is their sense of belonging to their extended families, is the fact that both of them feel that they belong and integrate the family of the other into their lives. So I thought it was such a dramatically different idea than the American idea, where most people live far away from their families, many people see their families like 3 times a year or 2 times a year. It was a completely different expectation of marriage, right? So as we are trying to work with intimacy in a culturally sensitive way, first of all, it's really important to realize that different individuals in different cultures will have different priorities about what it is. That's number one. But I also think that, so I was trying to conceptualize it because still we know we may not be able to describe it exactly, but we all know when we feel intimate, right? So this is my best attempt here. Intimacy is a subjective experience of connection or belonging that is grounded on wishes and priorities of both partners. To synchronize the wishes, the partners must engage in dialogue and negotiations, and usually they need to be supported by a bedrock of well-functioning relational processes that allow them to dialogue and negotiate. Okay, so I explained this better in my paper on intimacies and what this well-functioning processes are, but I will just read to you a few things that I think oftentimes to support intimacy, we work on with our patients, not on what the intimacy should be, but in order for them to connect, they have to have a differentiated enough sense of self that they feel that they understand the boundaries between I and the other, and unfortunately, I don't have time to really go into each one of those supportive processes. But I think to be intimate, in some way or another, we have to be able to expose ourselves. Lyman Wynn talks about to be intimate, we need to be able to expose ourselves and trust that the other person will be empathic to that exposure. I like that definition. You know, it's a process definition. Kathy Weingarten talks about intimacy as joining in the co-creation of meaning. And what she means is that, is what I said before. If I want to be intimate with, in the long run, with someone who loves movies, I better develop some interest for going to the movies, right? Joining the other person in something that is important to them and vice versa. That's Weingarten's idea. The other thing that I, as part of a conversation with a friend of mine, Carol Jenkins, is that I think to be intimate, we have to be able to be both other focused and self-directed. You know, we have to be able to move from one to the other. I need to be able to know who I am and what I want and what I like, but I also have to be able to be other focused and put myself aside and focus on the other person and what they need and what they want and what, you know. So that ability to move back and forth, I think is an important ability to maintain intimacy. Then, you know, I think for sustaining intimacy over time, there has to be, as I said, you know, a sense of equity and mutuality, fairness, and I think generosity is a very important ingredient in, you know, I think sometimes all of us get very focused on me, and what I do or what I need, you know, I need, you know, and not pay attention enough to the pleasure of giving, you know, and being generous to the other person. The other process that I think is really important, I really like this idea by Gottman, that in order for you to sustain intimacy, there has to be more positives than negatives. So, okay, you can have some bad moments, but, you know, I can have a bad moment with my husband, but if he comes around and he caresses me and he gives me a kiss and then says like, you know, do you want to eat something good or something, or brings me chocolate? Okay, that interaction loses its importance in the context of many other positive interactions. So, and then I think also in order to sustain intimacy, we need to know how to manage our vulnerabilities and our yearnings. We have to be able to talk about them without expecting too much, without pressuring, without feeling that the other person is responsible to heal all the vulnerabilities that I brought from my past. You know, so managing our vulnerabilities is a very important thing in maintaining intimacy. Okay, so, okay, I mean, I think we have just a little time. Why don't I see if anyone has any comments? You know, you will have those slides, I think, is that right, Marlene? They are published, right?
No, I didn't think we're ready to
no,
put them out.
Oh, no, okay, no, oh, okay.
But they will be in the recording. If that's
right.
what you mean, yes.
That's what
but
I mean,
we're
yeah.
not sending people your slides.
No, yeah, I'm not, because I'm working on them still. So yes, but you know, they will be on the recording if people are interested. But also the paper, the articles. There's a list of articles here that I want to. Okay, there's a lot more. So okay, so all these articles, if you are interested in going into these ideas a little bit more, a lot of these articles involve the vulnerability cycle, and you can actually download them from my website. Oh, sorry. God, I'm really having some problems with this. Can you check if there's any questions? And
yes, I don't see any open questions. So we invite folks to ask questions, or if you have any comments.
Yeah, I'd love to invite comments, questions. I like the interaction. No?
Well, I did say in your introduction that you are very clear So that may be why
Okay.
people aren't asking any questions.
Okay, okay, but
Wait, let's see, we might have,
okay.
oh, no, this is, could we just see the last few slides that we didn't have time for?
Okay, but since I know we have a few minutes, I wanna just say something about intimacy and the risk. Okay, just to finish with some beautiful thoughts from other people. Bryn Brown says that our vulnerabilities can be a source of connection or disconnection, depending whether we embrace them or we run away from them. She says, it's risky to expose our vulnerabilities. However, when we do so, we tend to feel more authentic, alive, and also more intimate. I think she's right on here. And then Steve Mitchell says, reaching for the love buried under encrusted resentments requires courage. No risk, no gain. I think it's a beautiful grasp of what vulnerabilities are and what is required for intimacy. Sorry. Okay. I don't want to lose.
We have a couple of things. One person just wanted you to know that they love how you don't only focus on family of origin, but other life experiences and traumas in prior relationships. And then we have Christina Y, who said that they have a question. So what is the question, Christina, if you want to state the question?
Would you like me to allow her to unmute herself?
Yes, please. Oh, it's here, Sierra. In the instance in which one partner is primarily relying upon their own internal objects with little movement based on real world objects and facts, how might we address this impasse? Is there anything to be done here?
Okay, let me see. The person is kind of stuck individually. Is that
that's what I'm assuming, on their own internal objects and not.
Yeah. Well, I think that, when we work with the vulnerability cycle, we deal with the interactions, with the relational, and we deal also with the individuals, and the individuals, if an individual is stuck, I may want to see him individually a little bit to try to understand what the stuckness is about. Sometimes people are protecting themselves for a reason, and I need to understand why, and I need to understand what would happen, if they didn't protect themselves in that way in the context of their relationship. So yes, I mean, I think working with the individual sometimes is part of the process when someone is very stuck. But I think you have to be a very experienced couples therapist to know when to do it and how to do it. How do you work with the individual in the context of couples therapy? Because your job, you're hired to help with the relationship. So the individual work is always in function of how it's going to support the relational work in the couples therapy, unless the person came to me for individual therapy. And the serious danger here is not to over-identify with the person that you are seeing individually a little bit more. So oftentimes it's very important to balance and try to see the other person individually as well, so that if the point is like, if they really want, if this couple wants intimacy, at some point they want to improve their bond, I have to be always careful about work individually in the name of the whole. So that's, I don't know, I hope that helps.
Okay, and we have a question asking, what do you mean by meta-communication in therapy? Because they found that different therapists can mean different things.
Well, I'm using the term as was originally used by the MRI group. By the way, I've talked so much about the MRI because I spent some time there. I was so interested in what they taught me initially that I spent some time there. And I think the idea of meta communication is to be able to communicate about the communication. So if my communication has an aggressive tone, to be able to talk to my husband that, okay, when you talk, let's imagine he says something, he has an aggressive tone. I can talk about, I understand that you'd like me to be more punctual, but, the way you talk to me is really aggressive. So you can talk about the communication, you address the communication and what the issue is, but you address also how the communication is being delivered. And I think I said that in the beginning, how the message is to be taken. Sometimes that's very unconscious. Sometimes we all do have these undertones that we are not aware. So to be able to even take responsibility for them and to clarify what they are is a very important part of therapy. So,
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, we have one more question. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
because I wanted to finish with Virginia Goner's thing here before we go. Okay. Go
we'll
ahead.
give you time to get to it. This question is, I appreciate your slides on mapping of the vulnerability cycle. On average, over how many sessions does it take for you to do this?
Good question. First of all, I think the interactional cycle, that's why I separated it initially. I tried to get it in the first session as some, I usually am able, the fact that, the survival strategies, the vulnerabilities that are activated, the activation processes, I try to get in the first session, second session. And then I expand that to understand when did that process started, then that's the context, when do you get the ideas that she's trying to humiliate you? That could be the history of the individual, that could be the family of origin. Then I begin to complete it. So through the whole process, I see those the diagrams as a way of collecting information too. It's a tool for collecting information as well. So I keep adding information. And I have my list of vulnerabilities here, the list of vulnerabilities here, the list of survival strategies, the list of survival strategies. And I keep adding because sometimes I didn't get it completely right. I may put, I see, he's not exactly critical. He's actually more like a lecturer, and then I may modify in my chart. So I hope that helps. It's part of the whole process.
Okay. You wanted to get to?
I just wanted to say,
yes.
because I think this is a very beautiful thing that Virginia Goner said, about intimacy and vulnerabilities. It feels risky to own our profound need for the other, to bear the inevitable injuries that come with the territory, and under best conditions, there is the pain that is healed by having our suffering recognized and repaired by the one who caused it. Everything is here. Meta communication, empathy, and the reality of relationships. It's not a smooth going.
Well, I think that that really says it all, that life is not simple.
Not simple, and we as therapists shouldn't be the ones to idealize it. We are the ones to help with repair, with healing, with starting again. We can do a lot, but
Yes. Well, let me take this time to thank you for this incredible presentation that has, covered so much. It's like a full course in just the span of approximately 2 hours. Thank you very much. You have given us a lot to think about, and I am very grateful to you, and I think I speak for others who have, I'm sure, benefited from this incredible presentation. So thank you very much, Michele.
Thank you, welcome. And now for the group, I just want to say that if they by any chance want to reach me, my website is michelesheinkman.com, and then my email is there too. Okay.
Yes, and they thank you
care.
for making your articles available.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you.